Entering a new family. When Olivia Carter, a 37-year-old elementary school counselor from Denver, Colorado, first set foot inside the stately brick home in Cherry Creek, nerves fluttered deep in her stomach. She had been dating Mark Bennett for nearly 2 years, charmed by his laughter and steadiness, eventually falling for his quiet resilience as a single father. Mark was a successful architect in his mid-40s, a widower who had pieced his life together after the tragic passing of his late wife, Victoria. Yet, Olivia wasn't naive about the challenges waiting for her. Mark's daughter, the sharp and strikingly independent 17-year-old Grace, had barely spoken more than a handful of words to her during their Sunday brunches and family outings. Grace's loyalty to her late mother was unwavering. Her silences in Olivia's presence were thick with unspoken resentment. Olivia knew that to Grace, every move she made in the Bennett household was scrutinized, measured against the shadow of a mother no one dared to replace. The day Olivia moved in felt monumental. Boxes filled with her books and photographs lined the grand hallway. Moments from her old life peeking out between Mark's modern art and Grace's ballet trophies. Mark hugged her warmly, his words of reassurance a balm against her anxiety. She noticed the way Grace lingered on the staircase, arms crossed, quietly observing, her expression unreadable beneath a curtain of chestnut hair. There were rules Olivia swore to herself she'd follow: patience above all else, respect for the spaces that weren't hers, a gentle persistence to be present without intruding. Still, reality hit hard. Mealtimes were tense. The table split between polite queries and teenage indifference. Olivia couldn't help but notice pictures of Victoria still adorn the mantel. She respected that, knowing grief lingered in unexpected ways. Late at night, Olivia lay awake, listening to the house settle, wondering if she could ever truly belong, or if she was doomed to remain an outsider in her own home. But beneath her unease, Olivia clung to the hope that, with kindness, consistency, and time, the fragments of these two families could become something whole, a new chapter worth fighting for, even if every first step seemed impossibly fragile. The hidden coldness. On the surface, Grace Bennett embodied all the traits of a polite, well-mannered teenager. A casual observer might comment on her respectful greetings, or the way she dutifully set the table, her slender fingers lining up the silverware with quiet precision. But beneath this courteous exterior was a nightstorm of emotions Grace refused to share with anyone. Not her father, not her friends at school, and certainly not the new woman in the house, who insisted on using her first name with easy familiarity. In private, Grace's walls were fortified. Her bedroom, decorated with photos of her late mother and collages from ballet recitals, was her safe place. Mark rarely pressed her with questions, giving her the respectful distance she'd always cherished. Olivia, however, represented an intrusion. Though she never raised her voice or crossed an obvious line, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's every word was an attempt to replace what had been lost. This unspoken judgment colored every interaction, making Olivia's simple kindnesses feel artificial, sometimes even threatening. Before Olivia's arrival, dinner had been a quiet routine between father and daughter, a simple exchange of stories and mutual understanding. Now, every meal felt staged. Grace responded to questions with cool, monosyllabic answers, focusing on slicing her chicken or stirring her pasta. Sometimes, just out of Olivia's line of sight, Grace would catch her father's searching glance, as if silently asking her to try harder. Instead of softening, that unspoken request made Grace retreat further inside herself. What made things harder for Grace was the lingering influence of her mother's presence. Family friends might visit and comment wistfully about Victoria's warmth or her wisdom. Whenever Grace heard those stories, she'd clutch them tightly, proof that her memory deserved defending, that her mother's place in the house shouldn't be so easily surrendered. It didn't help that Grace's biological mother, Victoria, had once said, "No one could ever fill my place." Those words echoed in Grace's mind whenever Olivia made dinner or rearranged the living room. No matter how small the changes, Grace's coldness wasn't always loud. It was in the slight downturn of her mouth when Olivia made a joke, in the way she closed her bedroom door with a deliberate click, in how she lingered in her car an extra 10 minutes after school, scrolling through old photos rather than finding her new stepmother inside. Behind every small gesture was a river of loyalty, longing, and unresolved pain. An icy current Olivia sensed, but could never quite reach. For Mark, witnessing this divide was painful too. He loved his daughter, terrified of pushing her away. But he also cared deeply for Olivia and wanted her to feel welcome. Trapped between these two worlds, he often found himself withdrawing, hoping, perhaps naively, that time would slowly warm the house again. Unbeknownst to Olivia, Grace, in her stoic, controlled demeanor, vowed to monitor every step she took. If Olivia was searching for a path into Grace's world, she would find it blocked by silent, unwavering coldness. A chill born not of malice, but of heartbreak, unfinished, and a fierce devotion that wouldn't melt easily. Secret schemes. Beneath the surface stillness, plans were hatching, delicate, intentional, and fueled by a single, unwavering motivation: to keep Olivia from ever feeling at home. For Grace, her life before Olivia had been built on routine and quiet understanding, and she would do almost anything to protect what remained of that world from the intrusion of a stepmother she had never asked for. Grace was not alone in her campaign. Evelyn Parker, Victoria's closest friend, and, by extension, Grace's surrogate mother figure, kept close watch over the changes at the Bennett house. Evelyn saw Olivia's cheerful efforts as opportunism, her patience as manipulation. Over coffee dates and errands, she filled Grace's ears with stories of stepmothers who ruined families, of loyalty that must outweigh politeness, of how real love is proven by who you fight for. Together, Grace and Evelyn took subtle steps. It began with what seemed like harmless fibs. One afternoon, Grace quietly whispered to Mark that Olivia had been rearranging Victoria's keepsakes. A small lie, but enough to cause a rare argument between the couple. Evelyn, meanwhile, started gossip among the old neighborhood circle, questioning whether Olivia was in love with Mark or the comfort his well-appointed home could provide. At school, the schemes took a different shape. Grace's best friend, Chloe, loyal almost to a fault, helped her stage a scene at the school counselor's office. She hinted at feeling unsafe at home ever since Olivia moved in, always careful to keep details vague, but loaded with implication. Emails trickled to Mark from concerned teachers. Is everything okay at home? Mark, increasingly worried, became distant, spending late nights at his office, fretting that the fragile peace he'd built was already crumbling. Even simple routines took on new, secret meanings. Grace left Olivia's favorite mug just on the edge of the kitchen counter, so it would inevitably fall and shatter. She set the thermostat to an uncomfortably high heat, hoping Olivia would be blamed for the power bill. Olivia's attempts to cook family meals were quietly sabotaged. Ingredients misplaced, kitchen timers reset, recipes mysteriously altered. Every small frustration Olivia endured, convinced she could weather the storm with patience and quiet understanding. Evelyn's campaign, while never overt, was relentless. She organized gatherings that explicitly didn't include Olivia, then made sure Mark felt guilty for letting his new wife feel excluded. She staged these social pressures so subtly that Olivia rarely realized she was being manipulated until it was far too late to protest. The narrative grew, feeding itself. Olivia was an outsider. Olivia didn't understand the family's values. Olivia was changing things too quickly. One evening, a crucial turning point arrived. Grace, emboldened by Evelyn's support, accused Olivia of giving away Victoria's old books to charity. Mark, grief and anger mixing, confronted Olivia, who was blindsided by the accusation. It took days for the confusion and pain to subside, during which Olivia realized she would need to do more than wait for the family to accept her. She would have to actively defend her place, even as every step forward exposed her to new misunderstandings and heartbreak. All the while, Olivia's own son, Sam, 8, and quietly struggling to adjust, watched the drama unfold. Everything his mother endured, he internalized, torn between loving his mom and trying not to make waves in this tense, unfamiliar world. Sam's isolation became the silent cost of the schemes, reminding Olivia every night why giving up was not an option. The conspiracy was never loud. It whispered through misunderstandings, festering in awkward silences, and in the tiniest acts of sabotage. Olivia's world narrowed, trust no longer given lightly, warmth faltering, but her resolve only grew. The storm of secret plans raged around her, but deep inside, Olivia promised herself and her son they would not break, and when the time was right, the truth would find its way to light. Patience and wisdom. Through the strain, Olivia made a conscious choice not to retaliate. She knew better than to meet coldness with coldness, or suspicion with angry denials. Instead, she reached deep for the best of what she'd learned in years as a school counselor: how patience, a gentle persistence, and a careful listening ear could sometimes move mountains where force could not. Every day became an exercise in restraint and quiet courage. Olivia started journaling, recording moments that seemed off, comments from Grace that didn't feel quite right, items misplaced with too regular a pattern, late-night arguments fueled by misunderstandings she never intended. She saved emails, gathered her observations, and built a quiet case for what was really happening inside the Bennett house. Not out of vindictiveness, but to equip herself with clarity when the time for truth arrived. With Sam, Olivia softened the world. She began new bedtime rituals filled with stories of hope, made time for after-school adventures just for them, and carved out safe spaces in the house where he could find her without fear or awkwardness. The bond between mother and son, though tested, grew in depth and resilience. They became each other's shelter in a storm of unknowns. At work, among her colleagues, Olivia confided little of her hardship, but she sought guidance in books and quiet reflection, rebuilding her confidence and perspective day by day. Crucially, she refused to let herself believe the narrative being spun around her. Olivia never lost sight of her own truth, that she was not the villain, nor was she powerless. On rare, quiet evenings when she and Mark could find a moment alone, Olivia chose honesty over accusation. She asked questions, listened deeply, and expressed her own fears without bitterness. Mark, surprised by her vulnerability, glimpsed again the woman he had fallen in love with. Not a threat or an outsider, but a partner whose heart was still open, even while it hurt. Meanwhile, Olivia gently but steadfastly reached out to Grace, leaving encouraging notes when she knew the days at school were long, offering rides to ballet practice, inviting her into conversations when it made sense, but never pushing when Grace retreated. She learned, with humility, that trust was not something to be demanded or expected. It was something to be built, stone by patient stone, one compassionate gesture at a time. Knowledge was Olivia's other ally. She quietly researched blended families, attended workshops, and read everything she could find on healing after loss. Again and again, she focused not on changing Grace or Mark or even Evelyn, but on strengthening her own resolve and patience, knowing that true wisdom was to choose peace, but never at the expense of self-respect. As tensions reached their peak, Olivia's meticulous notes and calm presence began to show their worth. She was ready. She had seen all that happened in the silent corners of the house and could finally name what had gone wrong, not with anger, but with a clear, steady understanding. In this hard-won clarity lay the first real hope that change, though slow and hard, might truly be possible for them all. Turning the tables, it happened on an evening heavy with rain. The Bennetts' home, cloaked in the kind of thunder that made the windows shiver. Olivia could feel the storm, not just outside, but inside the house as well. A pressure, a sense that something was about to break. The week had been one of the worst, thus far. Mark had grown distant. The conversations between him and Olivia clipped and careful. Grace, emboldened by Evelyn's whispers and her own certainty, barely offered a glance, let alone a kind word. Even Sam, wise beyond his years, but still achingly young, seemed quieter, the shadows under his eyes growing darker. Olivia had retreated further into herself, quietly gathering the puzzle pieces inside her leather-bound journal, waiting for a single moment when she might let the truth see daylight. That moment came when Olivia returned home, one night to find Mark waiting for her in the living room. His jaw set, eyes tired and wary. Grace sat on the far side of the couch, arms crossed, Evelyn's presence nearly tangible in her silent support. There was an accusation waiting in the air. One more push meant to tip Olivia off the scales for good. Grace produced a stack of old, treasured books, claiming Olivia had attempted to donate them without permission, an unspoken betrayal of everything the family valued. Mark's questioning was pointed, hurt, seeping through every word. It would have been easy for Olivia to respond with anger, to defend herself by lashing out. But she remembered every choice she'd made up to this point. The patience, the steady refusal to resort to resentment. Instead, Olivia calmly requested that everyone sit down together, including Sam, whose wide eyes flickered with worry. Reaching into her bag, Olivia pulled out the journal she'd kept for months. Her hands trembled only a little as she set it on the coffee table. Then, in a steady voice, she explained why she'd begun to keep such detailed records. Not to blame, she insisted, but because she felt adrift, caught in the undertow of misunderstandings she couldn't outswim. Flipping through the pages, Olivia read back quiet accounts. How kitchen routines seemed oddly undermined, the way simple objects were misplaced, overheard snippets of conversations in which her presence was lamented and even feared. She recounted emails forwarded from teachers who'd inexplicably grown concerned about Sam's well-being. Messages he knew nothing about, but which dovetailed neatly into each carefully orchestrated scenario. Olivia didn't name names, nor did she cry. Her delivery was methodical and clear, like a teacher outlining the facts. She invited Grace to clarify, to give her version of each event, and looked to Mark and Evelyn not for pity, but for understanding. The air felt taut, loaded with years of sorrows and suspicions. Mark flipped through Olivia's notes himself, slowing when he reached the gentle tone in her writing about Victoria's memory, about wishing to honor the woman who had come before her, not erase her. There was a silence so long that Olivia thought she might break under it. But Grace, for the first time, seemed unsure. Her hard edge wavered. Evelyn looked away, face shadowed by something almost like regret. Then Sam, whose voice was rarely part of such moments, spoke up, softly, but with a clarity that carried through the room. He recounted simple moments in which he'd seen and felt the tension, how he'd tried to make himself invisible, but noticed more than he'd ever let on. His small admissions, honest, tender, and uncoached, acted as the linchpin to the web Olivia had carefully unraveled. Pressure built, then snapped. Mark turned to Grace, asking for the truth beneath all their pain. For the first time, Grace's defenses faltered, and the truth spilled out, messy and raw. With trembling hands, she admitted to her small sabotages, to the pressure she'd felt from Evelyn, to the fear that letting Olivia in would mean betraying her mother's memory. Tears fell, and for once, Olivia did not approach, but simply let Grace exist within her honesty. Evelyn, visibly shaken, offered a stammered apology. Her actions stemmed from pain as much as malice. It was not a movie-perfect resolution. The wounds cut deep, and trust, once fractured, cannot be glued together over a single stormy night. But the Bennett household no longer echoed with facades. Olivia, at last, was seen for who she was, an equal, a hopeful, a mother, never an enemy. The turning of the tables wasn't a victory parade, but a quiet opening of doors, a willingness to understand. For the first time, the family began the slow, uneven process of healing, guided by honesty, compassion, and the hard-won knowledge that real love sometimes means sitting inside discomfort until it leads you somewhere new. Transformation within the family. The morning after that fateful storm felt like stepping out into a world subtly changed. The air inside the Bennett house was quieter, not the silence of buried tension, but the softer hush that followed a hard, cleansing rain. Windows gleamed with the first light, and for the first time in months, Olivia found herself awake before dawn, heart beating not with anxiety, but with a tentative hope. She wandered through the house in her slippers, noticing small but meaningful shifts. Where once the hallway was lined with silent reminders of separation, Victoria's portraits, Grace's trophies, Olivia's own neatly stacked boxes, there now seemed to be a gentle mingling. A framed family photo had quietly appeared on the entry console. Mark, Grace, Sam, and Olivia together, their smiles tentative but real. Someone, maybe Grace, maybe Mark, had added a potted plant to the living room, its green leaves sprawling peacefully, as if taking root amidst old shadows. At breakfast, the air spoke of a new kind of awkwardness, one born not of hostility, but of people learning how to behave honestly with one another. Grace emerged from her room, hair still tousled, and instead of her usual pointed silence, she muttered a soft morning before reaching for the cereal. Mark hovered at the stove, flipping pancakes, clearly unsure whether to force conversation or let things flow as they would. Olivia, surprised by her own restraint, simply smiled and poured the coffee. Even Sam seemed lighter, his eyes darting between the grown-ups with cautious optimism. In those first days, the changes, while fragile, were unmistakable. Mark began inviting Olivia's opinion on more household matters instead of second-guessing every suggestion. Grace, although hesitant, sometimes paused at the kitchen doorway, visibly grappling with her desire to hold on to old resentments and an emerging curiosity about Olivia's perspective. There was no instant trust, but there were tiny concessions. Grace, letting Olivia help with a school project, Mark defending Olivia in casual conversation with Evelyn, who grew notably more distant. Olivia finally exhaled, relieved to see Evelyn's pull loosening, the house reclaiming its own emotional boundaries. Particularly healing was the time Olivia began setting aside for Sam and Grace together. There had been so much fear lingering between the children, an older sister protecting her world, a younger boy terrified of becoming invisible. But with the family's secrets laid bare, Olivia felt emboldened to bridge the gap. She suggested a weekend hike in the nearby foothills. To her shock, Grace came along. The journey was full of awkward starts and stops, tense silences broken only by the sound of boots crunching on gravel or Sam's nervous questions. But as the climb wore on, laughter occasionally punctuated the air. Grace showed Sam how to identify wildflowers. He, in turn, taught her a silly chant he'd learned at school. That one simple Saturday became the first memory they could all claim as theirs. Inside and outside the house, growth happened in fits and starts. Olivia continued to attend workshops and read articles on blended families. Now, often with Mark joining her, the two sharing highlighted passages late at night. She prioritized honest check-ins with everyone. Family meetings became a new norm, where grievances, hopes, and boundaries could be aired openly. Grace's trust, so hard-won and easily threatened, flickered unsteadily, but began to glow brighter as the months ticked by. Evelyn's absence was another formative change. Without her constant interference, Mark and Grace both discovered how much their own relationship had depended on outside affirmations, and how freeing it was to shape their family story themselves. Evelyn's occasional visits became less fraught. She no longer arrived with pointed questions or whispered grievances, but instead brought cookies, books she thought Sam would like, or quiet stories from Victoria's youth that allowed Grace to embrace her mother's memory without weaponizing it against Olivia. Still, nothing in the Bennett house was ever picture perfect, and that, Olivia realized, was precisely the beauty of their situation. Arguments still occurred over chores, over rules, over whether Olivia could organize the annual 4th of July barbecue. Sometimes, Grace would backslide into icy silences, or Mark's guilt would make him retreat emotionally. Yet, there were also spontaneous pizza dinners, joint laughter during backyard snowball fights, evenings spent sprawled on the couch, learning to love each other in their own flawed, stumbling ways. One of the most profound indications of change arrived on an otherwise ordinary Thursday night. Olivia, still cautious, knocked gently on Grace's slightly ajar bedroom door. Inside, she found the teenager scrolling quietly through her phone, earbuds dangling in her lap. "Hey," Grace said, voice low but not unkind. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of how you handled everything," Olivia began, nerves making her words tumble fast. "It's not easy for anyone. I know I'm not your mom, and I don't want to try to replace her, but I would really like to be someone you can count on, in whatever way you need." Grace hesitated, then set her phone aside. The two sat in quiet, the space between them charged less with opposition, more with shared weariness. After a long pause, Grace shrugged. "I know you're trying. I just miss how simple things used to be. But I guess we all do." For the first time, Olivia saw vulnerability not as a weapon, but as an invitation. She nodded and left, heart pounding, tears pricking at her eyes. Not from pain, but from recognition. Growth, she understood, was not always comfortable or obvious. Sometimes, it crept in sideways, in whispers and half-finished conversations. Months passed. Birthdays, holidays, and small victories accumulated, weaving a web of new traditions. The family planted a garden in the spring. Grace, choosing snapdragons in honor of her mother. Sam, voting for sunflowers. Olivia, favoring herbs for kitchen experiments. When the flowers bloomed, Olivia stood among them with Mark, both quietly marveling at how even the most turbulent seasons could yield moments of wild, defiant beauty. What defined their new reality wasn't forgiveness offered or apologies received, though those things mattered, but a daily, mutual acceptance that love could mean holding space for both sorrow and hope. Old wounds sometimes cracked open, but with each gentle gesture, each honest word, the rift between them closed a little more. They were, at last, a family in motion, not fully healed, not unscathed, but undeniably theirs, a mosaic of broken pieces and careful, loving repairs, protecting a newfound happiness. In the weeks and months following their hard-won reconciliation, the Bennett's home continued to transform in ways both subtle and profound. Outwardly, the household still bore many of the same routines. Breakfasts with uneaten toast, evenings scattered between homework and mismatched schedules. But underneath, the emotional climate had shifted. Where suspicion and lingering silence once reigned, there was now the cautious emergence of trust and the tender beginnings of genuine affection. For Olivia, the journey to protect this new happiness was anything but passive. She recognized, perhaps more than anyone, how fragile peace could be after the earthquakes of resentment and betrayal that had shaken the family's very foundation. She understood that love in a blended household was not something to be declared once and left to grow on its own. It needed tending, vigilance, and above all, a willingness to show up for the messy moments, again and again. The process was neither linear nor effortless. Olivia was mindful that trust, especially with Grace, came in uneven increments. One day, a shared laugh over a burnt lasagna could feel like a breakthrough. The next, an offhand comment might summon old defenses. There were times Olivia lay awake, replaying each interaction, questioning whether her careful gentleness would ever truly be enough, whether Sam would always carry the burden of divided loyalties. Still, Olivia believed deeply in holding space for everyone's pain, her own included, while refusing to let it dictate the future. She created time for regular check-ins, not only between herself and Mark, but with Grace and Sam as well. Sometimes these talks were awkward, sometimes teary, and sometimes simply silent. But she held firm to the idea that honesty, even fumbled honesty, was better than letting old wounds fester unseen. Mark, too, found himself evolving in this season of protection. For years, he had walked a fragile line between honoring the past and allowing something new to flourish. Now, with the truth out, he reframed his role, not just as a bridge between his daughter and his new wife, but as a builder of a home where both loss and hope could be acknowledged openly. He became more present, listening deeply when Grace voiced her frustrations, and holding Olivia's hand during the moments she doubted herself. With time, even Sam, who for so long had drifted on the periphery, began to blossom. Seeing his mother respected and his fears validated, he bravely staked out new ground for himself. He invited Grace to his school soccer game, gingerly at first, then with more enthusiasm when she actually cheered from the stands. The simple gesture sent ripples through the family. For once, Sam was not just a bystander or a casualty. but a connector,
Integrity is
someone
not just
who
a
coaxed
policy.
both
It is
laughter
the
and
foundation of
vulnerability
public trust.
out of his new
We must
sister.
uphold these
Grace's
standards
own
rigorously.
contribution to the protection of their newfound happiness was harder to describe, but no less important. The battles she had once waged, silent or overt, to defend her mother's memory against Olivia's presence, slowly transformed into a more nuanced loyalty. She found ways to honor Victoria, not by resisting the inevitable changes in her home, but by helping to shape them. On the anniversary of Victoria's passing, she invited Olivia and Sam to visit the cemetery together, sharing memories with hesitant
there.
generosity.
You must be the new
Olivia,
student.
for her
I'm
part,
Madison.
never claimed these memories as her own, but listened with respect, acknowledging both what she could
finally
never
over.
replace and the incredible gift that was being offered. The absence of Evelyn, whose influence had once loomed so large, allowed the family to reclaim their own story. Grace no longer sought her approval before letting her guard down with Olivia, and Mark stopped measuring every parenting decision against external expectations. That's not to say old wounds disappeared. They simply no longer served as blueprints for every interaction. When misunderstandings did arise, as they inevitably did, the Bennetts faced them with something approaching humility. Apologies were made sooner. Tempers reined in before they spiraled out of control. Olivia's background as a counselor gave her tools for fostering resilience, yet she realized that living this transformation was messier than any advice she could give. She encouraged each member of the family to name their fears. Grace admitted to fearing both forgetting her mother and being forgotten herself. Sam confessed that he sometimes wished for things to go back to the way they were, even while loving their new life. Mark, more vulnerable now, told Olivia that he often worried he'd failed both women, Victoria and her, by not seeing the truth sooner. These conversations broke open the walls between them and let the light in. Messy as it was, the act of protecting happiness in this family became a quiet revolution. Instead of sweeping hard days under the rug, Olivia introduced the ritual of rose and thorn at dinner, each person naming one good thing and one challenge from their day. Sometimes, these confessions gave way to tears. Other times, to laughter so infectious it echoed late into the night. Through these small, daily acts, they wove new traditions into the fabric of their household. As autumn painted the trees around Cherry Creek in gold and rust, the Bennett home took on a new warmth that went beyond decor. Olivia hosted a neighborhood open house, inviting not just friends, but also those who had once hovered on the side of suspicion. The act was less about broadcasting their happiness than about making visible the choice to move forward together, despite scars. Grace found herself sharing stories with a neighbor's child, realizing with genuine surprise that she no longer felt the need to armor herself around Olivia. Mark and Sam manned the lemonade table, and Olivia's laughter rang through the backyard as she encouraged everyone to join in a three-legged race. Yet, for all these outward signs, Olivia knew that happily ever after was a myth, or at least not the whole picture. There were setbacks. Jealousies flared, boundaries needed renegotiating, and the pain of what was lost sometimes returned without warning. But instead of seeing these moments as failures, Olivia gently framed them as the price of real and lasting connection. Protecting their happiness meant recognizing its fragility as well as its power. It meant returning, again and again, to the work of empathy, forgiveness, and trust. Toward the first anniversary of Olivia's move-in, the family gathered in the garden they'd built together. The sunflowers Sam had planted stood tall, their yellow faces turned toward the fading light. The snapdragons, chosen by Grace in memory of her mother, bloomed in hues both delicate and bold. Olivia could not help but marvel at the way both joy and grief lived side by side among the blossoms. They laid out a patchwork blanket and shared stories, some familiar, some new, all tinged with the acknowledgement of how far they'd come. Grace presented Olivia with a small, handwritten letter, her words halting but earnest, in which she admitted that while she still missed her mother, she was grateful for the happiness that had begun to return, in part because of Olivia's patience. Mark placed his arm around both children, and Sam, braver than ever, asked if they could plant another garden next spring. The moment glimmered with the truth of what they'd worked so hard to achieve. A peace hard fought, a happiness that, though imperfect, was theirs to defend. In the quiet that followed, Olivia found herself feeling not triumphant, but deeply protective. She understood that this new happiness, unlike the fragile peace of the past, was resilient precisely because it had been tested and chosen over and over by each member of the family. The memory of old battles remained, but it was their willingness to keep reaching across the distance, to keep choosing each other in 1,000 small ways. That made all the difference. To Olivia, defending their happiness didn't mean pretending everything was perfect. It meant standing together, even when uncomfortable, and continuing the slow, brave work of building a family, not from convenience or obligation, but from love lived out in daily life. She promised herself, and silently, the others, that as they looked toward the future, they would honor the hurt that brought them together as much as the joy that now sustained them. Their happiness, new and hard won, would remain protected by the lessons learned, patience, courage, and the quiet, relentless hope of a family's second chance.